We start the recording. A couple of comments on about housekeeping. Chris will share the deck that is using for the presentation later, so I will manage to share this. And if you want to do the question, Chris will be happy to respond in line, so you can simply unmute and make your question, and Chris will give the response. In the meantime, I have to invite you to keep on mute, to stay on mute if you are listening and not talking, just to exactly, just to avoid some noise in the background. Perfect. It's happened. So we are fine, Chris. It already happened.
Excellent. Well, pleasure to be here. Thanks, thanks, Corrado, for letting us chat to everybody tonight. And hello, everyone. By way of just I guess a brief, hopefully you can all see the screen. I hope that's all working. Do let me know if it's not. Is the audio a bit better now, Corrado? By the way, is my sound needs to be higher? Okay. Well, hopefully I'll talk a lot louder, and then hopefully we'll be all right. But just by way of a little agenda, I guess I'll give you folks a little introduction just to who Waracle are and who I am, just so we become a little bit more acquainted. And following that, I'll dive into the talk about the topic tonight, which is all about bringing business and IT together. Now, I'm going to focus on 3 core principles around the importance of technology companies and understanding who is one, removing the silos within organizations and how to achieve that, and then looking at mindsets. And I'm going to talk through finally a case study at the end of this where I'll share some sort of real world insights. So that's kind of what we're going to be, what I'm going to be running through. Now, before I get stuck in to this, the agenda is there just to provide a bit of structure. I believe greatly that learning comes from sharing stories and experiences, and that includes the good, the bad, the ugly, what went well, what didn't go so well. And to Corrado's point about asking questions, with all of that in mind, if you have questions, comments, thoughts, you want to share something, you want to dive into something a little bit deeper as we go through it, please feel free to dive in and ask questions. Don't wait for the obligatory Q&A at the end. Just unmute and dive away. There's a handful of us on here, and with 18, I'm sure we can manage that. So please don't hesitate to ask questions, as I say. So let me tell you a little bit more about sort of Waracle and myself, just so you know a little bit more about the work that we do. Just on me, I earned my stripes, if you will, as a tech engineer back in the late 90s. I've run product teams before moving into the commercial side of business, eventually actually starting my own technology and consulting company, which we grew sort of quite successfully and aggressively. And so I've seen transformation from within a business as part of a team, but I've also been the CEO. I've ran those agile teams. I'm still involved in running agile teams. I still have my own products that I'm involved in. But today, my day-to-day job is I'm a management consultant that works with Waracle, one of the principal leads inside organizations, helping them to drive through transformation and change. I tend to focus in financial services, although I've been involved in digital transformation across a number of verticals, from healthcare to retail. I guess my point here is that I've seen a lot, and I wanted to provide an insight into my background just for some context, as hopefully this will be more of a discursive session we can talk through, because my aim this evening is to share experiences that hopefully you guys can learn from and help you in your day-to-day functions and roles. So just for avoidance of doubt, I'm the one in the pink, by the way. As with all of these things, I was trying to find a photograph of me that was recent, and the most recent one was with me and my good lady. So that's my better half, Kirsty, there as well. Let me tell you a little bit more about Waracle. Now, in short, Waracle are Europe's largest mobile development company. We specialize in financial services and digital health, and there's circa 210 people inside the organization working across a broad range of products, and we help enterprises to leverage digital technologies and make a real difference in the world. And we do that through consulting and collaborating with our customers, supporting them through their own digital transformation initiatives. Now, we're not just a body shop that provides developers. We solve very complex problems and build world-class digital products that make a real difference to people's lives. And that's kind of where we've really sort of gained a lot of experience, and really has influenced the conversation or the talk that I'm going to go through tonight, really, is sharing some of that, particularly when it comes to the case study. But enough about me and Warricle. Let's kind of get stuck into tonight's topic, which is all about bringing business and IT together. Now, I mentioned at the start, I based this session around 3 core principles that I believe are critical success factors that executive teams need to realize if they want to truly transform and survive in the digital age. Combining these principles effectively brings business and IT together. And don't get me wrong, there's lots that sits around the 3 principles I'm about to go through, but at a very top level, fundamentally, this is what I use to drive home to senior people inside large companies to help them understand at a high level what it takes to successfully transform, which for me is really about bringing business and IT together. So we no doubt all know the statistics that around only 30% of transformations ever actually succeed. Now, technology has been the core reason for those initiatives going ahead, but it's not been the core reason for those initiatives actually failing. In my view, that's mainly been down to poorly organizing the operating structure, combined with a lack of understanding from a senior level that fundamentally every single company today is a technology company. And so that's a really important point, because my first sort of guiding principle is that, well, wherever we work, whoever we work for, we're all working for technology companies. Digital is the heart of everybody's business. Whatever service or product a business offers or provides, fundamentally, they're tech companies. A bank, is a technology company that provides financial services. A law firm or personal injury lawyer is a tech company that provides legal services. A university, tech company that provides educational services. Now, this really matters because once an executive team starts to accept this and understand it, 2 things start to take place and start to happen. And those 2 things are the mindset begins to shift, and that in turn makes the question start to be asked, that what they start to ask the question of themselves, and they begin to see fundamentally the business needs to change the way it works. It needs to become a lean, functioning, agile operation that can be responsive to change. And that's why once this is kind of the core principle for me, the first one is that we've got to let them understand every company is a tech company. They're a technology company. And by doing that, this is what that then starts to drive out. Now that the mindsets are starting to change, there's an understanding for this organizational transformation, which I've just mentioned, in the form of operating structures. They start to understand that new operating structures, new operating principles need to exist. And so my guiding principle number 2 is to create product teams instead of departments. And this is to ultimately help remove silos. And to do that, to truly bring business and IT together, we need to reorganize ourselves, and we need to remove those silos. I'm preaching to the converted. I'm sure many of you will know this and understand this anyway. But to achieve this, we've got to create teams based around products. Now, that means forming a team that's based around end-to-end delivery from concept to cash. basic lean principles. But this feeds on from that technology, understanding the technology, that you're a technology company, because this isn't just about a tech team. This isn't just about creating an agile delivery technology team that the business throws a requirement set over the wall and they go off and then they start to build it. This runs much deeper than that. This is really about creating genuinely a product team from concept to cash that consists of the technology specialists, whether that's architects, developers, UX, UI, but this is also service design, it's marketing, it's compliance, it's security, even the customer. That's how you then start to bring this together. Now, it's easier said than done, of course, but this is truly how we begin to bring business and IT together. And this is about taking the right action. There's lots of frameworks and principles and things that are out there, but ultimately keeping it simple. This is the key. And the key also is to start small. Many organizations, when they're going through their transformation, they kind of try to roll it out as a big bang. And I know that, there's many organizations out there with lots of things to change and lots of things to do. But in order to do this right, you've got to start small and do it in chunks. And that's a really important part of this. But what this also then leads to is mindsets, because, no doubt all of you will have experienced, those of you that are running either agile teams or involved in coaching and helping people. There's resistance in organizations, and part of all of our roles is to help develop new behaviors, mindsets and behavioral changes, where many organizations right now today are struggling. It's the hardest part of transformation, but it's arguably, in my view, possibly the most critical, which really brings me to the third and final principle for me, which is changing mindsets, transforming mindsets. Now, technology has never been an inhibitor for transformation. It's always been the enabler. The biggest challenge with transformation is people. We are the problem, but we're also the solution. And humans develop behaviors based on experiences, and our behaviors are learnt behaviors. Startups have it much easier when it comes to culture and behavioral stuff, because they're starting from scratch, and this is one of the reasons that they can disrupt so quickly. But large incumbent organizations who have huge amounts of people, lots of legacy systems, lots of legacy behaviors, learned behaviors, they have an incredible mountain to climb. So to initiate behavioral change and to change mindsets, it's important to provide experiences. Agile coaches, workshops, etc. They're good and they're all part of the process. They're fundamentally important part of the process, but on their own, it's not necessarily enough. You have to take people on a journey, which means providing experiences that helps them to learn the new process, the new way of doing things. I often look at aviation for inspiration, because in aviation, we don't just put a pilot at the controls of a newly released aircraft. They may have thousands and thousands of hours of experience, but they're not placed into the cockpit with a new aircraft comes along. They're put into a controlled, simulated environment to develop new muscle memory, to develop new behaviors around managing and controlling that machine, that function. And it's the same when we look at behavioral change and changing mindsets as part of the digital transformation journey, as part of bringing business and IT together. It's about bringing those agile ways of working across the entire organization. IT generally is, in most instances, has got it covered, so to speak, but the rest of the business hasn't. So to do that, to take them on that journey, to change mindsets, to make behavioral change, we've got to deliver an experience. So we have to simulate that. We've got to provide experiences to initiate the mindset shift, to instigate those behaviors. And that's not easy, and there's some examples of this that I'll talk through in the case study in a moment, but some key takeaways for this really are collaboration. This means working, not just collaborating as cross-functioning teams within inside the business. It's actually really important to create an ecosystem that, the organization can collaborate with outside, so it can bring specialists in who've got experiences elsewhere. That's really important. That actually accelerates transformation initiatives in my experience, and there's lots of things out there that have demonstrated that. But creating learning environments outside the workplace is also really important, because what that does is it provides the experience to people of what good could look like, of how things could be done, and how other people are doing it. In the world of COVID, that's been very difficult to do, but as we hopefully see a route out of this, it is so important to give people access to other environments to observe and create that observation deck. And my final sort of tip on this one is diversity. Diversity is a topic that's often discussed at many different levels, but diversity is really important when it comes to transformation and bringing business and IT together, because what this actually means is that, it's proven that product teams that, are end-to-end proper product teams with lots of diverse skills, with lots of diverse people who come from different backgrounds. So in financial services, for example, if you look at product teams, very traditionally, they're all from FS backgrounds. That's good because there's good domain knowledge, there's good experience there, but we need diversity in those teams, because that diversity also brings new ideas, new concepts, new ways, new approaches. And diversity is a really, really important part to succeeding in that transformational journey. Now, they're my sort of key principles. And what I'd like to do is turn to a case study and talk through some of these and kind of bring it to life, really. Now, I can't disclose the company involved in this, but I was the lead principal consultant on this particular program, and I still do advise this organization. And this client is from financial services sector. Their situation was like many companies out there today. They're market leading, they were doing well, but the threats from new entrants and the pressures from the market to deliver more digital services was creating problems. Mainly their problems lay in long delivery cycles, their customers and stakeholders demanding new digital services, and they didn't really have the ability to respond to those changes. Their current configuration and setup was geared to much more old way of working. They had agile practices. They had people that understood agile principles, and to a certain extent their IT function was delivering services in an agile way. They were using agile tools, but essentially the organization wasn't quick to deliver. Things took a long time. Things took at best months, but in most instances years to get a product to market. So the exec team knew that they needed to change, but there was also resistance in the business, not just from the usual suspects, so to speak, but even at board level. So they needed to ultimately to transform, and that transformation needed to happen reasonably quickly, as is always the case. And so I'll talk through some of these things now, rather than me necessarily just going through each part of this. As I said at the start of this talk, really, I want to share value, and on the slide here are the sort of key actions that were taken to go on that journey and take this business through, or start the transformation and take it through it. And on the next slide, I'll of course share the outcomes and the positive things that happened and the lessons that were learned through going through it. But what I wanted to do is, I will continue to talk through this, but if anybody's sort of listening to the stuff that I've gone through, is looking at the things on that slide and would like me to dive into any particular parts of it or ask questions around it, then do just chime up, unmute your mic and throw some questions out. So I'm happy to do that. For me, it's about deep diving into things that are going to be beneficial for you.
So Chris, on that, thank you for that. Good opportunity, which might be good. Measuring value, not agility, right? That's a common thing, right? Because we measure what's perceivably easy to measure. But how did you shift them from the goal being agile and how we measure how well we're doing agile to how we then shift towards value delivery?
That's a great question, because you're right. It's one of the things that it's easy to sort of write down and set out, but how do you actually, can almost convince an exec team of this? And for me, it was really with this particular case study, it was really about saying to them, what is value to you? And for them, it was all about there was a group of stakeholders that weren't in the business; they were external to the business. This included lenders as well as legal representation firms that they connected into. And one of their biggest challenges was the fact that they knew that new entrants were coming into the market and literally taking market share, and they were being turned to innovate. So value for them was products to market that made a real difference to the bottom line, that generated new revenues, that protected income streams. So what we did was, what I focused them on was understanding, well, let's look at what really is business value. And in my mind, there are only 3 types of business value. We're either protecting revenue, we're saving revenue or making efficiency savings, or we're creating new money. They're the 3 types of business value. So anything that we're doing inside this organization across the board should be focused in one of or a number of those 3 pots. And that began to shift the mindset, because you mentioned, measuring agility. And for me, that's almost like vanity metrics. We're running stand-ups, we're doing these ceremonies, we're doing these things, and then they try to sort of roll it out with coaches across other areas of the business. But that's not really delivering. I'm not saying it's not working, but in most instances, it's not a core metric that says, actually, do you know what? Here's the outcome that we're going to deliver, and this is what we're pushing towards. And that's how we shifted them on that, Andy.
Cool, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, they're trying to measure productivity and using agility as a proxy for that. And it's an interesting challenge when you say to them, what value are you delivering? And they go, don't know, especially at an exec level. That's scary.
It is very, and I think, when I talk about the end-to-end product, creating product teams to remove those silos, execs need to sit in that. They really do. Now, I know in big organizations, that's difficult, because in some instances, and to your point about measuring outputs rather than outcomes, how many features have we released this month or whatever else, and are we spinning through all of this? It's hard to transfer them away from that. But if they're part of it, and you can link it directly to the agreed business value outcomes, it does begin to introduce those mindset shifts. Because mindset issue isn't just at the delivery level, as no doubt we all can, we all know. A lot of the time the mindset shift starts at the exec team. This particular case study, what was quite unique about this is that I was able to work directly with the executive team and consult with them. And actually, one of the things that we did was to the point about experiences. Human behaviors, as I've mentioned, are all about experiences. Our behaviors and our learned behaviors through experiences. And part of helping exec teams or senior leadership teams is almost helping them visualize this. And they talk about this, and I'm sure some of you have read it, and those of you that hadn't, I'd recommend it in I forgot the name of the book now, but the Phoenix Project, where they talk about, it's obviously a fictional book, but it talks about sort of this whole piece around value. And there's a part in the book where they take members of the team to a manufacturing facility to actually visualize the flow of work. With this particular case study, we did that. I took them out of the business and took them, interestingly, to JLR and said, let's go through. I want you to see what it looks like, how raw material moves through this organization, and a Range Rover comes out the other end, literally, a few hours later. That's how slick your operation needs to be. This is why we've got to change. This is why we're measuring different types of value. And that experience really started to change the way that they looked at their organization. And that's why, for me, a big part of bringing business and IT together, creating those true product teams, end-to-end, concept to cash, you have to involve that leadership team, but give them the experiences so they can really start to see it, because it's so hard when they're just in that environment all the time.
I'll ask one more question, but I don't want to hog, because there's obviously other people on the call. But have you had the experience where, as part of measuring that value, they don't really understand what their product is, or they're confused about what the product is, or they're struggling, or they're making it too hard? Is that something you've come across, and how would you deal with that if you have?
Yeah, I've come across that a number of times, not particularly with this particular case study necessarily, but that it's happened to me particularly, whereby somebody in the leadership said, we've got to innovate, we've got to create new stuff. And so they've then started to, somebody has had an opinion and started to drive with some almost control, really, drive home that we've got to start creating new products. But then it's been a bit chaotic, and nobody's really understood, well, what is it that we're trying to create here? What is it that we're trying to do? And so, in the particular example I'm thinking of, they started to create innovation teams, or they created an innovation unit, or an innovation hub, as they called it. And it was kind of a bit of a silver sexy word that, people threw money at, but it didn't really have any purpose. And the way that I've approached that historically, to try to kind of get them to understand and look at things differently, is to actually take a step back and take a step back to, well, look, the business value again, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? And what are the things that we need to focus on? Because if we're going to start making decisions, look, we live in a digital age now. Part of our transformation that we're working on is organizing ourselves to include our data, so that we're making data-driven decisions. So what intelligence are we using to help drive this forward? And who's involved in that? And again, it comes down to the organizing. Now, you can come across different personalities in that, because with quite strong personalities, they can push heavily back. So, well, I know my industry inside out, and we're going to do this, and that's fine. Part of the process of establishing, especially the sort of stuff that I'm talking about tonight, is establishing whether or not to work with organizations, is actually establishing their readiness. And that's a big part of what we did with this example. We went in and I had to establish, well, how ready are they to change? Because unless we've got sort of key people to really work on this movement with us, that can really start to drive this home and we can trust one another, build a partnership, this isn't going to work. And so that's, in that instance, to be able to find a way to drive things through. The example that I've given is probably the best one I've got, which really was taking them back to, well, what is it that we're trying to achieve, and what data are you making these decisions around? And when that starts to become a realization, they began to realize, well, actually, yeah, we're throwing stuff out there because we're almost in panic mode. We're being pressured to deliver something. Well, actually, let's take a step back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Has anybody else got anything before I kick through some of these? Oh, okay. I won't say. I'm mindful of time, and perhaps the opportunity to ask questions. Only a couple of more bits for me to sort of talk through, but to give a bit of detail around this particular case study, I've just mentioned there about readiness. One of the most important parts I found of bringing business and IT together, succeeding with transformation, has been to actually establish, well, how ready is an organization to change? And for you, that might be a team. You may be looking after a team, or it might not be a whole organization. It might be a department, or whatever it is. And there's an element of understanding how ready organizations are. It's actually a really important thing, or really important step to take. And discerning and understanding an organization's readiness really can be a key success factor, because if there's an expectation that they want to kind of do something, and they know what their success is going to look like, yet you can identify early on that there are conflicts in the board. You've got senior leadership people, whether they're part of the team, whether they're part of the broader organization, who are not going to go on that journey. Well, then you can identify that fairly early on, and it's about then saying, well, reassessing where the goals are. So that was a big part of this. The other thing is a framework. There are lots of different frameworks that are out there. My framework is something that I developed over the years, which is based around 6 pillars, and that that can be used in different ways, but those pillars range from sort of that readiness piece to digital strategy, all the way through to customer engagement and the importance of linking all those two together. But that is a key success factor, to have a framework that can be communicated to the business and to the organization. This is what we're going to work on, and these are the key steps that we're going to take along that journey. It's high level, but it's something that they can kind of hang the hat on and they can look at, and it keeps everybody on point, especially in a bigger organization where you start small, but this is going to fan out across it. And with every business that, especially now, I mean, the stuff that we're doing at Oracle within some of the financial services institutions that we're involved in, it's developing the frameworks for those organizations to start and to fan out into their organizations. The third bit on there I've touched on in answering Andy's question there, which is about experiences. I can't emphasize this point enough. There's only so many PowerPoints that you can do. Obviously, the workshops, the coaching, all of that stuff is so important. But actually, what really influences behavioral change in humans, and I think you said there was a psychologist that was going to be talking on that, and I'm sure they'll agree, is that it's experiences. We've got to provide experiences that, in my view, need to be outside of the workplace. Ideally, it's difficult in the environment that we exist in now, but it's a big part of the success that I've seen in organizations where we've been able to extract them. In this particular example, I did take them to a manufacturing facility, but it wasn't just the executive team in the end. We took all the people from key areas of the business into that manufacturing environment where they saw literally a car be produced, and we went through every single area. They understood the lean manufacturing process. And then what I did was that we brought that back to how that mattered inside of their business, so they understood it. And we worked with some really challenging people. They were good people, but they'd been there a long time, over 20 years of experience and service. And yet, so they were resistant to some of this stuff. But once they'd seen it, they were more willing to sort of try new things. And those experiences made a difference. And that's really important. And of course, as I've mentioned, you've got to start with that leadership team. I mean, there's no one size fits all here. So you have to adapt this. On there, we also got starting small. In this particular example, what we did is that we took one product. There was a number of products inside the organization, but we took one product. And once we'd kind of done the introduction to Lean, we'd done the introduction to Agile, they had a tech team that was working with Agile principles. We brought the rest of the business into that. We brought the coaches in to help, and we made that a regular occurrence. But that was one team focused on one product and focused on those 3 core business values. We started to work on what are the things that really matter, what's going to make a real difference to the business, and started to deliver that. All of a sudden, those behaviors on a day-to-day basis started to make a big difference, and we could see that the stuff was coming out. And what happened is the rest of the organization started to see. Now, a big part of the success with this was that we were communicating out what was happening, when it was happening, and it's almost like creating, I mentioned it in one of the other slides, this observation deck. It's so important that people can observe what's going on. This isn't going on behind closed doors. This small unit is really making an impact and a difference, and people can witness it and see it. And this is the movement that starts to be created, because people then get a little bit more excited about it. But we don't just show them the good. We have to show them the cock-ups, the things that don't go so well. And that's interesting, because what tends to happen is, especially managers and senior leaders, they start to want to go back to old ways. They want to quickly revert back, and that takes real, I won't put it lightly, courage for them to not do that. But it's so important that we continue, that we don't just show the good and the good things that come out, but we show the failures too, because it's actually, we've got to create this environment of safety where, look, you know what, it's okay that, we don't want to be failing all the time, but of course, that's how we learn, and one of the big success parts of this was the CTO of this organization changed his mindset completely, to the point where it was a pleasure to watch him stand up in front of his people and say, if we're going to win and we're going to be the best at what we do, we need to outlearn our competition. I need you guys to outlearn our competition. That's when you know that success is, and transformation, business and IT is truly coming together, when you start to see executives like that say, use that kind of rhetoric. You know, that was a big important thing. And of course, all of that led to the mindset shifts that then came along, and that was able to be then fanned out across the organization. And my final piece really is, I'd like to touch on it, well, 2 points really, is around the empathy piece and understanding people. You know, HR is a big part of this, marketing plays a big part of this. And of course, you know, that leads to the collaboration piece. There's got to be internal collaboration, but there has to be an ecosystem outside of the organization that's being tapped into as well. Because when you bring all of these things together, that's really what drives this home. And of course, the final point that we've just discussed, measure value, not agility, which is what a lot of organizations tend to do. And to draw this to a conclusion, the outcomes for this were all the things that needed to happen: faster delivery cycles. When COVID hit, this organization rapidly had to transform its operating function and send everybody home, which was a completely, you know, unheard of in that business. It's an FS organization, there's lots of compliance and regulation. They were able to rapidly adopt and get people working from home. Fundamentally, in the period that they did that, over the initial 7 months, 5 new products were released. And when we looked and we started to measure that, we could see that there was happier people, the products were being put out there, these were MVPs. 2 of them didn't work so well, they kind of flopped a little bit, but the feedback on them, because the customers were involved in the delivery of those products, meant that it was re-released very quickly with a whole new set of features and tools that actually made a huge difference and gave them some competitive advantages and started to pinch some additional market share in an area that they weren't necessarily working in before. Of course, the customer experience began to improve, and you can pretty much see the rest on there. The big one for me was the innovation and the thought leadership. You know, they were really seen as a thought leader before, but even more so now, and they've really kind of given themselves that step gap between any new entrants disrupting and coming into the market, and they've created that environment for them to really sort of make those step changes. And that innovation piece is really important, because when they have an idea, they can go from concept to cash very quickly. Some of it works sometimes, as we saw with the products that released, and some of it didn't. But ultimately, they were the outcomes, and there was lots of lessons learned in all of that. And that was over an 18-month period of transformation. But with that, that's pretty much all I had to talk through. So I hope that's been insightful and useful.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Maybe something from my point of view or question. I'm working in a company who's more than 100 years old, and we have lots of procedures in there. We are quite good positioned in the market in shipping, but now we started an agile transformation in the IT, which is okay, but we get to the limits now. We have to get in touch with the business and so on. What do you recommend when this business side is kind of reluctant to let go of their processes, or if they generally still prefer to throw their demands and requirements across the fence to the IT without any involvement from their part? They just want to afterwards complain that it doesn't work. What do you recommend how to tackle these issues?
There's a number of ways, and a lot of it is to do with the personalities that are ultimately being worked with. And I do empathize with your position, having been in that situation before with companies that are over 100 years old. There's lots of change is very difficult. But the way that I've always approached these things in the first instance is to attempt to actually not necessarily announce that we're going to create this new product team, is to almost just naturally do it by way of inviting those people that are a bit resistant to some of those things to become part of the ceremonies, to become part of the practices that are taking place. Now, the next phase of that is in my experience, has been some do that, and then we can start to take them on that journey by collaborating and working with them. But the other side, there are some people who are very much, I'm too busy, don't make my problems your problems, just get on with it. I've told you what I want, give it to me. And in those sorts of situations, it's very difficult to overcome that, which is why it's so important that this has to start at the top. We have to bring leadership teams together to say, look, we've got to start to look at doing things in a new way. And we continue in this way, but we can see this tension. We can see that things aren't working. We can see that there's some good, but we can also see there's some not so good. So we've got to test new ways. And then it's that testing piece and inviting them on that journey and saying, well, look, can we begin to collaborate in a different way? Let's just try something new. And it's about finding the sponsors that will support that, which is why the leadership team is so important, because what we're doing here is, of course, is we're inviting people to move from a very hierarchical way of working. I mean, you yourself are clearly entangled in a hierarchical structure that's, you know.
Indeed.
So we're asking people to move to a matrix way of working, but you know, success leaves clues. You know, if this organization chooses not to make those changes, at some point, this is going to become a problem. And so there's no easy fix to it, but there's some of the tactics and approaches that I've used in the past to get this sponsor to go on that journey. And sometimes it really is about finding the people within those departments from within the business who actually are really interested in collaborating and building a unit and saying, look, let's look at this differently, because ultimately everybody wants the same thing to deliver success.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Does anybody else have any questions?
When you talk about readiness to change and readiness to take this on, that's quite an interesting, because there's certain market trends where big transformation products are being sold as a you know, snake oil, right? If you do this right, you will transform your organization.
Yeah.
But a lot of people find that you know, that they don't stick, because they don't. It focuses on the processes and those kind of things, as opposed to the you know, the sustainable change, which is the mindset, and leaving the changes to the people. So how do you establish the readiness for them? Because I assume by establishing readiness, you have an agreement. If you go into a client and say, well, actually, you're not really ready to do this in the way that we want to do it with you, how would you go about that? Do you need to get into the organization? Is there a framing of that?
Yeah, very much so. And I can probably turn to Holger's experience. You know, there's an organization that if it was, you know, if we were in there looking at this, if I was in there looking at that, part of the initial thing that we did is an audit. We want to audit the organization to establish its readiness to be, you know, can we break down these barriers? Do you understand that these are the things? What is it that you actually want to do? Because for some, you know, and why do you want to do it? You know, I can think of one very recently in a financial services organization. When we were asking the questions why, they'd come along and said, look, we know we've got problems. We know we need a new mobile strategy. We need to look at things differently. Why? When we start asking the questions why, we start to really understand what the driving forces are behind making these transformations, what's driving these initiatives. So then what we do is we can start to actually have a look, especially some of the bigger organizations who are public and they're having to, you know, all their strategies out there and the information of what it is that they're trying to achieve over the next 3 years. And we start to kind of bring the two together and we say, well, so would you like us to help you organize yourself to achieve this? Here's some examples, but are you ready to do this? What we'd like to do first is, here's a framework that we'd like to use. But as part of this, we want to audit and look across 3 core areas: product, number 1, number 2, technology, and number 3, operations. And we're going to audit how ready you are to do this, which will include these people. We need to understand who they are that are going to be part of this. And we'll feed back on that. And it may be that we identify that we don't think you necessarily are ready, and there are some changes that are going to need to be made. And that might be in personnel, it might be in the way that things are made up, in order for us to actually take you on this journey. Because no management consultancy, no technology company can really truly come in with a product and just say, hey, here's a set of processes, go and throw these and everything's going to work, because every organization is different. And I've waxed lyrical about it all night pretty much. We're dealing with people. You know, people are the problem, but we're also the solution, and we have to understand who it is we're dealing with and their propensity and willingness to want to change. And so it's all about that audit at the start, is how we do it.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Just a question from me, quick question. What do you think about the OKRs and other tools that may have to define the objectives, why we are doing the stuff actually? That is the question that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there's always lots of new ways, and I think new principles coming through. I mean, in the more recent book, which I think talks a lot about OKRs, sooner, safer, happier, or better value, sooner, safer, happier. He talks a lot about introducing these new sort of methods for measuring value. And I agree, they're all good ways of doing things. But there isn't one size that fits all. In fact, he talks very eloquently in that book about establishing readiness. You know, are they ready to do this? But to answer your question more specifically, I do think that they can work. I do think that they are important, but I think the business, along with the people, have to, when I say that the organization or the team, that's true team end to end, has to agree, well, what are the things that we're going to measure? What are the things that really are those sort of key values or those key metrics that are going to make a difference? In my mind, that's what's most important.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that, by the way. Any more questions?
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, sorry, there is a question on the chat. Yeah, sorry, from Annie. Yeah, which do you think would be the most important strategy when you did bring your business and IT together?
The most important strategy? It's an interesting question. Strategy to me is about establishing where to play and how to win from a business standpoint. That's what strategy is to me. When it comes to a strategy for bringing business and IT together, what strategic approach should we take? For me, it is around setting those three core principles. You know, that's the strategy that I have advocated over several years of doing this, and having been a CEO and seeing disruption in my own organization to the level whereby we were growing so quickly that even we thought that the people that were coming in, that we were onboarding them in the right way, but the culture was shifting and changing, that when we actually stopped and took a step back, it was a case of, do you know what? This is about experiences, this is about mindsets, this is about the people. And I think the strategy has to be, in bringing business and IT together, is to really look at it from that standpoint, and start out with that we're a tech company. Because fundamentally, if the people that are running that organization understand that, they then start to recognize those two key things, which is not only are we a tech company, but what we're also now starting to realize is that we need to organize ourselves in a different way, because technology companies are organized differently. This isn't just about IT over there and building a product and us getting annoyed when it's not what we thought it was going to be, and then throwing something else at them. This is about bringing them together, and that means a change of organizational structure and a change of mindset. And it's those three things, it's that strategic approach for me that really does start to make a difference, because it's the foundation that you build upon. If you've not laid the right foundation, whatever foundation you have laid, everything that piles on top of that is going to cause a problem.
Thank you.
And do you find as part of that that's the business often see IT as a competition, right? That you know, outside it, you know, win-win or win-lose is kind of good, but there's almost that they seem to forget that they're one company. So when you're talking about bringing business and IT, and you are a tech company, I think that'll be really interesting, and you get a lot of feedback from people, especially, you know, Olga with your shipping company, right? They'll go, no, we're a shipping company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Because big
Indeed. Yep.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I have a question. I just wanted to kind of follow on what Andy said, in terms of kind of the separation from IT and business. So I think you had mentioned in terms of transformations that they're not always successful, but I wanted to kind of get an idea from you. You know, what I have found is that you kind of have the business side and you have the IT side. And what you've mentioned, it's important for everybody to see themselves as a tech company. But what do you do when you get to that point where the mindsets are not changing, or you don't have the right mindset to kind of facilitate the transformation that's needed? Because what I found is that you have a lot of the pressure being put on the IT teams to adapt and accept all of these. Hey, you have all of these swanky new agile tool sets and all of these things, and you need to change and you need to do that. But in terms of what's needed for the whole mindset and the culture to change, the business doesn't really do that. So have you had examples of how were you able to kind of help bridge the gap, or is it just sometimes those transformations will fail?
The answer is yes to both. Sometimes those transformations do fail because and I'll put it bluntly, people are paying lip service to this transformation. They're not actually bought into it. They claim that they are, and that you've got all the tools. This is all down to IT. And I recall back in sort of 2014, working with a particular organization where the director of strategy's words to me were, working with IT is like sticking pins in my eyes. And I have no intention of doing that on a daily basis. And yet what fundamentally his problem was that he didn't understand that they needed to make the changes. And so when we started to work with them, it became quite obvious that he was part of the problem. And so I worked very closely with him and took him out of the business to say, look, I'm going to share something with you that's going to be uncomfortable. And that uncomfortable part is you're actually part of this problem. You don't see IT as a function that can actually help you, but you are a technology company. Whether you like it or not, this is what you are, in my view. Now, we can either clash heads with this, and this is part of the readiness piece. When we did the audit, we said to you that these are the things that needed to happen, but you're now sort of resisting it a little bit. So we can either work on it and run with it and give us a chance and let us demonstrate this and prove it to you, but you've got to be supportive of that, or we're going to have to take a backward step. Now, that's easier for a management consultancy that's in there doing that than it is perhaps for somebody such as yourself, potentially, who's inside an organization trying to facilitate those movements and those changes. But unfortunately, those conversations have to be had. On the other side of the fence, the example of actually, well, yes, there was a problem and we fixed it, was the example I could give with the case study that we used. That board was split down the middle between the CEO was very much behind, we've got to drive this home. We are a tech company. I can see us being disrupted. I've got to feedback. I've got to report to shareholders, all the rest of it, that we've got a plan to absolutely protect this business from disruption and be part of the disruption rather than being disrupted. Yet he had people on the other side of his board table that were very much like, this is all just kind of the new latest thing for consultants like these lots come in and earn loads of, we're a stalwart of this industry, we're going to be absolutely fine. And the idea there was, as soon as we could see what was happening, and we could, as part of the audit, we saw that was that split and they were transparent with us, was to remove them from that environment and get them bought into it. And that included taking them to that manufacturing facility. When we got back from that manufacturing facility, it was mandated that they had to attend the sessions with us. And the first few things that we did was something really simple. And it was, some of you may have heard of it as agile coaches, was to play the coin game with them, where we actually said, right, what you saw in that facility yesterday, we're now going to replicate it here, but each of these poker chips are a value. And we put a figure on that value and made it real. We were able then to take stuff out of their Jira platforms and say, look, this last release that you did over 6 months, here's the value. And when we analyzed the data, they could see that they'd wasted, it was, 6-figure sums of money in features that were never even released. And then once we played a little game with them, it was kind of like each one of those coins represents those tens of thousands of pounds. So do you want to go with your way, or should we just try this new way and see how quick we deliver value? And that really, really hit home, because they could not only revert to the experience that they'd had the day before, they could see that a guy on the line, something could pull an andon cord and stop the production, and everyone would pile around. They could see that in their own organization, and that's how we ultimately did it.
I've got another question as well. Just wondering if you've got any experience of a company that's gone too far. So I worked with a company that tried to embrace digital transformation, but the technology team says, "All right, great, we're a technology company. We need to invest massively in lots of developers," and they were spending quite a lot of money and not necessarily getting the value out of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Ray Dalio in his book Principles refers to the pendulum effect. Now, Ray Dalio is not an IT guy, if you don't know. He's not into digital transformation. He's one of the biggest hedge funds in the world. But he talks very eloquently in his book Principles about the pendulum effect in society. And this happens on a day-to-day basis inside businesses where people move from one extreme to the next. And what you just described there is actually a commonality in lots of businesses whereby, and it actually happens sometimes in smaller, more sort of medium-sized enterprises and the much bigger companies, whereby everybody's bought in really quickly, and IT are almost like, well, we've got to have all this new architecture, we've got to have all these new people, we've got to have all these new big flashy systems, and it does happen. And what you've got to do in those instances is absolutely not hold people back, but back to what I said before, start small, because what we're doing here, guys, is look, we've just gone from delivering in these interesting ways where we were taking months or years to deliver big bang projects. We've just demonstrated that the value is in delivering little and often. Let's not go and create this, let's not go and replace the monolith by spending tens of millions on this great microservice architecture or serverless environments and getting all this stuff set up and then not actually putting anything on it. We've got to do it in small chunks. And it's just about reiterating that and keeping it simple and basic. That's always been my approach to this. And I use that phrase a lot. Let's keep the pendulum swing balance, not from one extreme to the other.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, Holger?
Yeah, I have another question. Chris, you mentioned value. And working in IT, I know the situation that somebody from business comes, I want to have this functionality, when can I have it? And how do we initiate kind of shift that they first, let's say, explain what they want from it and what the value behind this, and that the business side more explains the why behind such things and not only describes the requirement or demand, what they want to have, because it's always so difficult to get more information like, yeah, why do you have it? What it brings to you? And what do you suggest on that side?
It comes down to the educational piece again. And obviously we need to give people those experiences. And I always bring it back to what the business value piece is. Look, there are only 3 types of business value. Which pot does this sit in, or sit in more than one? Is this going to help us make money? Is this going to save us money because it's an efficiency saving? Or is this a new feature that's going to generate new revenue for the organization? Because business people should be and normally talk in commercial terms, so what value is this going to be in that regard? It shouldn't always be about commercials, but that's how they think. So it's kind of like, well, that's how I've always approached it, and try to encourage those behaviors, so that when there is fit conflict sometimes, where people in business can sometimes say, this feature, this is why we need it, but it's not necessarily giving us the value. It's sort of like, well, to get them to try to present the requirement in a different way, so that requirement, and it's a bit like in delivery teams, agile teams, your scrum team might work on points to establish the size of a particular feature or a piece of work. We can take those same points, that Archie sequence, and give it to business and say, can you align these points to the value that you attribute to this based on these 3 principles or these 3 core sets of business value, and invite them to do it. That's how we have to collaborate with them. But that's how I've done it previously in the past. But it is part of the journey of transformation. How ready are these people to adopt these new ways of working? It sounds like, for the particular organization that you're with, there's obviously challenges there in terms of how willing they are to do that.
So it comes to talking and talking and talking.
Well, doing and doing and doing is better. And an element of diplomacy obviously has to exist in these situations, but it is about invitation. It is about inviting people to look at things in a different way. Hey, look, we don't see necessarily the value in doing this. Can we invite you to do it in a different way? Would you be willing to work with me to try something different? I want to try something new. It's a bit radical, but I think it would be better for the business and better for both of us. And some people are going to say yes, and some people are going to say no. And in your sort of situation whereby, you know, there isn't a big, broader agenda to try to kind of shift to this way of thinking, it's very, very hard. And I don't envy that. I do understand the difficulties of it. But to bring about that action, sometimes it is about being a bit radical inside of the teams. And you know, we used to call it in one of the companies that I've been involved in the past, we used to call it creating war rooms. We'd create war rooms with other teams, not as in to go to war, but as in like, we're going to collaborate with you and we're going to focus on these problems and we want to work together. Forget where you know, we've got budget here, you've got budget there. Let's just bring this together and let's make this happen. And we don't want multiple sponsors. Let's do this together. And in some instances, we were met with rejection, not interested. And in that situation, there's not a lot that you can do. Hence, if the readiness isn't there, it ain't going to change.
Thanks.
And have you tried, one of the things we've been quite conscious of with the stuff we're working with at the moment is moving away from a transformation to an evolution.
Yeah.
And a lot of large organizations are kind of, they're a little bit reticent to do massive change. And transformation implies that it's a massive change. Whereas actually they say, we're doing it a little bit, but we want to transform. And we found that evolving what they're doing seems to land a little bit better so that you can then start to build on that. Because again, with senior leadership, right, they've got to this position by doing what they've done well and getting rewarded for it, right? So therefore, why should they transform? Transformation's for everybody else. Yeah. So when you talk about leadership, right, it's everyone else is doing it, I don't need to change. So for them, it's maybe not changing. It's more about, okay, well, taking what you know already and using it in a different way. Is that something you've had experience of? Is it something that is maybe a bit alien or?
No, the truth is that is happening inside of big corporations, whereby there's this view that, look, we don't want to kind of use, we've kind of been peddling this transformation buzzword for a bit of time, and it's, you know, it's not working for us, so we're just going to change the rhetoric and call it something else. And it's just labeling, you know, it's another word, it's another label to give to something. But when to your point about, you know, well, if we move to the phraseology around evolution, are we going to influence people in a different way because they've realized we've not really done this big bang transformation thing, we're just going to take it in smaller steps? Yes, I've had experience of it, and yes, it can work. But what is also happening, and if you look at the market, if you look at financial services, this is happening, but if you look across verticals, this is starting to happen. Big incumbent organizations are starting to realize that they can't transform necessarily, that they're never going to have that readiness. And the cost to go through the exercise in the way that everybody would like to is unrealistic. So what's more realistic is to actually start to look at how we can create new companies from what we've got. And I think what we're going to start to see, and indeed we are starting to see it, is these bigger organizations investing in smaller startups, creating their own startups. You only have to look at what's happening in sort of the mortgage space at the moment and seeing what some of the people, you know, are doing there. You know, there's consultancies being spun up specifically to support these organizations in creating new startups, because it's like, look, we've got this monolith. Are we ever going to change it? No matter how we phrase it, should we actually evolve in a different way by creating smaller, newer things that are self-organized? We can fund it, and we can actually create the culture that we probably need and manage it in a different way. And that's what's starting to happen. And my experience has been, and I have advised in those areas, look, actually this, as part of the auditing piece, look, this isn't going to happen. We understand you want to do something, but everywhere else, this is just going to be, you know, we'll probably make a lot of money in consultancy fees, but actually the output, the value won't be there, and that'll look bad on both. So maybe we need to start with something new. And that's what's starting to happen. Interestingly, on that point as well, if we think about what sort of COVID and what's happened, it's accelerated digital adoption massively. which has been a good thing coming out of something so terrible for the global economy and the world and health and all the rest of it. What it's also done is, and what tends to happen in a downturn, is that you will see the M&A market, mergers and acquisitions, start to really pick up, and that's starting to happen as people start to right size and start to think about investing in smaller things. And I think that for some companies, for some organizations, and for some of you that are in organizations that think, you know what, I really want to start to drive and make a difference here, that might be part of what's suggested. Why don't we create something new? Why don't we create a completely different, independent business that actually focuses on this product? Let's test this. Let's do something different. And, you know, there are people out there that are making those suggestions and being heard of, because trust me, the people at the top tables will be getting advised that in some of these bigger organizations from management consultancies.
Cool.
Thank you, Chris. Just one more question from me. You say that actually the new companies are technological companies, okay? But sometimes when IT people start talking with business people and try to introduce these new ways of working, what you say, the transformation process and what else, the business guys define this as techie stuff. So this is not something that is going to work for us. We are business, we are thinking differently. So what can be, with your experience, a key to open this door with the business that don't believe that the transformation should involve them too?
My main experience has been seeing the failures. Once they experience the pain of something failing and can categorically see what led, the chain of events that led to that failure, because of them not working collaboratively together, because they weren't organized in a certain way, that's where this really starts to hit home. Now, you don't want to be inciting, well, let's just sit back and set people up to fail. That's not good business. But it is about telling the story and finding something that is very similar, so that you can explain, look, here's an example of an organization, of a product that is either the same as ours, similar to ours, and draw on those comparisons. And so that we can do that autopsy and say, look, here's what went wrong, here's what went right. And that third party validation, that's how I've always approached these things with particularly reticent individuals. The example I gave earlier of the gentleman, the director of strategy, and if I named the company, you'd know who it was, who said working with IT is like sticking pins in my eyes. I gave him an example of a product line that was within his organization that was failing. To them, it was doing all right because it was generating revenue. But when we compared it against an entrant coming onto the market, he was able to deliver quicker. They looked better. They were getting all the press. They were getting the PR. They were per capita, in terms of per unit sold, they were more profitable. Their margins were higher. All of a sudden, it was like, what do you think is the difference between these two? Because they've got access to the same market that you've got access to. They've got access to the same people. They've got less money than you, yet they're doing better. If you just take it in isolation, they're doing better. So why don't we just take your team, same market, you've got access to the same people, you've got more money to spend, and try it and see that. And that's the conversation we have to have.
Yeah, you're right. But however, very often I heard a response like, "We are different." Probably you heard too.
Do you know, one of the regular sort of monthly sessions I used to have with an individual at a bank, they always used to complain to me how they were being compared to the challenger banks, whether it was Revolut or Monzo. It was always like they were always being compared, and they used to say to me regularly, "Look, we're sick and tired of people sort of, we're not like them. We're not like them. We're regulated in a very different way because of the deposit accounts, all the rest of it. We hold money in a different way, end to end, it's totally different." And I understood it. I understood exactly how, I understood her frustrations with being compared, because her view was, you're comparing apples with pears here. This is completely different. So, how can you help us? How can you help me to kind of help everybody else understand that actually we don't need to make these changes because we have to operate differently. And when we dug down into that, actually fundamentally what the difference was is that the challenger banks were different in their structures, their makeup. They were regulated in different ways. However, what they were doing differently, very differently, was that their regulation and compliance people were part of the team within the guidelines of what was set out by the FCA and everything else. They could still operate in that way, and that was the small change. When we talked about things being small and making small marginal differences, that was the small change that happened with that organization. Rather than we're different, we get you, you're different, but just bring this to here in the mobile team, and let's just see if we can get this wallet application out quicker than what we could do if compliance weren't part of it. Let's just see if that works. So therefore, we're not talking about big bang transformation. We're not talking about comparing them with a challenger bank and trying to do all this stuff. We're just talking about them, and we're just introducing something that's a little bit different, and we've given an example of it. And that's how we've approached it. I think sometimes we can say too much.
Great. Okay, one more question, if we have it. Okay. Okay, Chris, thank you very much. It was a very interesting session, particularly the final Q&A was really, really great, I think. You will find the recording session in a few days on our YouTube channel, so you can go through this session again if you want to review it. Again, thank you, Chris, for sharing, and keep in touch for all the links for the material and what else. And thank you to all of you for coming to tonight. And I hope to see you in our next event in June. So enjoy the evening and take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Everyone.
Good night to you all.
Take care. Bye.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you.